Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another interesting session of In Conversation series. Before we get started, some housekeeping rules. We would love to listen to your thoughts, opinions, and questions. Please type them in the comment section on your right hand side, and we will take them up during our Q&A in the last 15 minutes. Without a further ado, I hand it over to Chitrajit, who is the Senior Director and heads MIA region for Wibmo. Chitrajit, over to you.
Thank you, Sampada, and welcome viewers. Good afternoon to all of you. Today we are privileged and we are fortunate enough to have our panelists coming from two different countries. They are from two eminent banks, one from Oman and another from UAE. And while I will introduce them to you. It is only fair to mention that both of them have done world of good in digital payment initiatives for their banks, respective banks. And they have worked in different geographies as well. So both of them worked in Asia as well as in Middle East. So without taking much time, let me first introduce them one by one. And then it is only fair to share a few thoughts regarding Wibmo. Wibmo is today organizing this webinar. And then we will talk about the topic and we will directly get into the discussion. So first of all, let me introduce Mr. Vibhor Mundra. Vibhor is head of merchant acquiring and digital wallet coming from Mashreq Bank. And so far, he has all the initiatives, digital banking initiatives taken. Vibhor has spearheaded a lot of initiatives for the bank. He served as the chairman of the Acquirers Committee on the UAE Banks Federation, represented Citi on the NPCI panel to launch RuPay e-commerce in India, shareholder representative for Mashreq on Emirates Digital Wallet LLC, board member at FinTech JV of Mashreq. So welcome, Vibhor, to this webinar.
Thanks, Chitrajit, and thanks for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope
Good
all
afternoon
of you are
to
doing
you.
well.
Yeah, thank you. That's the best wish we should have after this post-pandemic scenario. Secondly, let me introduce another gentleman coming from Bank Muscat, Oman, Mr. Ashish Gupta. Ashish heads the mobile and e-banking platform for the bank. And Ashish has loads of experience in Barclays Bank, Kotak Mahindra in India, and presently he is with Bank Muscat for the last 13 years. So, thank you. Welcome, Ashish.
Thank you, Chitrajit. Looking forward to this night session with all of you. I hope it's a great learning experience for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So before we start and jump into the discussion, it's only fair to just have a couple of lines on Wibmo. So Wibmo is presently an integral part of PayU, which is one of the global fintech companies. And with the recent initiatives like acquiring BuildX recently, Wibmo and PayU Group has become one of the top 10 fintech companies in the globe. At the same time, so we started our journey in 1999 as a payment security company, and over a period of time, as the payment grows and we saw various avenues coming in, we have at the same time evolved our products and services. So from 3DS 1.0 to migrating into 2.0. Then when if you think about a customer journey, so customer gets onboarded, and then transaction authentication, transaction authorization, and when the customer is coming, he requires various payment instrument, whether it is wallet or prepaid card. Wibmo tries to stay in all the spectrum, to support banks and financial institutions across the globe. Today's scenario, we are present in almost, we have deployed 160 in 160 banks across the globe, especially in 4 continents, whether it is Middle East, India, and Africa. And we are slowly and steadily getting into Europe and Americas as well. So today, ladies and gentlemen, today our discussion session will be revolving around surge of digital payment and associated sophisticated fraud threat, which is probably one of the biggest issues which bankers and fintechs across the globe are facing right now. Let me just share a couple of things. Like one of the very important points, especially from UAE perspective, as per Visa study, 4 out of 10 UAE consumers experienced online fraud attempts in the past year. And the cost of fraud and theft in the world from banks and financial institution perspective is 16.4 billion in the last year. So you can understand that what kind of threat we are facing as people spend more and more time online, including many of them for the first time. Actually, fraudsters are using this as an opportunity to exploit consumers' fears and lack of knowledge. As fraudsters become more sophisticated, it becomes more difficult for issuers and merchants to secure payment transactions. Service providers must strike a balance between meeting customer expectation and preventing fraud while adhering to regulatory and compliance requirement, which is of pivotal importance. Fraud has become more sophisticated, as we all know, and so many avenues are being taken by the fraudsters to, create issues for the banks and for the end customers. And that is thanks to growing collaboration among bad actors, which includes sharing the stolen data, new techniques, and knowledge on dark web. On the other hand, consumers like to seamlessly move from one online activity to another, with payments thrown in for good measure. As they do so from one variety of devices, convenience, and speed of important and security measures is paramount actually from this perspective. When it comes to online shopping, consumers expect an uninterrupted and frictionless experience. Every transaction, from securing best online deals to securing the last sit, must go off without a hitch. Even fintechs are coming up with a newer initiative, starting issuing cards, or whether it is open loop or closed loop, coming up with many interesting use cases promising convenience to end customers. But one particular thing, when we are talking about fraud, one particular thing which is persisting and which is very important, that the growth of fintechs, the growth of digital banking across the globe. So once we are talking about this, I will go around the room and share my first question. I'll start with Ashish, you. Looking at the current adoption level, from digital payments perspective, how do you see e-commerce growing in next 3 to 5 years?
Sure, Vibhor. See, now when you talk about e-commerce, it has just been consistently growing in the last few years, quite rampantly. I would say approximately by a CAGR of more than 50%, it's been growing in last 3 to 5 years. And we certainly expect, at the minimum, this trend would continue, if not more. Uh, when you come specifically to Oman, the key enabler for e-commerce has been the government, because government really promotes digital e-commerce transactions. There is absolutely no cash that is accepted in the government locations. And with the pandemic striking in, people are not going out of their houses. All of the transactions are being availed by them at their doorsteps. So e-commerce has rapidly grown for government, and similar sectors like telecommunication industry, utility service providers, they have grown tremendously. If you look at the entertainment sector, subscriptions for the OTT platforms, they have rapidly grown and they have all hitched onto the e-commerce bandwagon. One very interesting sector I think all of us use at least once a week is the food delivery sector. So if you look at the likes of Talabat, TM Done, keyed in Oman. They've just grown multifold, and especially during the pandemic, they have got more than 100% growth. Uh, One very interesting use case in Oman is the retail shopping. So this is one area which I would say has not taken up that much of a growth because, typically specific to Oman, people love going out to the malls and doing shopping. And the trend that the retailer, the industries were expecting is people would continue to do that. But now, off late, this trend is changing. The retail outlets are building in the logistical capacity as well as the last mile delivery capacity, which had not been done so far. But I think this particular sector will grow massively in the near future. There are new players like Souk Mazoon who are basically collaborating with all the SMEs in the Oman and bringing on their marketplace onto their platform. So that is something that will also grow a lot. What is very interesting about Oman is that the international cross-border e-commerce is perhaps more popular than the local e-commerce. So, the likes of Amazon, Souk.com, Namshi, Alibaba, they are all very popular options, and both the domestic as well as the international cards are being used over here. Um, if I would say the sector, I think that is the one that initially got popular with e-commerce. It had been lying low for the last 1 or 2 years, but that is something that will grow again in the next. I'm sure it has already started growing. People have started traveling internationally, and that will something that will grow. But it's not just the e-commerce, it's all the digital experience that the customers are currently using, be it channels like internet, mobile, wallets. All these platforms are completely used by the customer, which essentially promotes a cashless society, which is good for the consumers, good for the banks, good for the entire financial ecosystem.
Fantastic. Yeah, yeah. You had shown or you have articulated it perfectly. So many avenues are there. I will throw the same question to Vibhor now, from Maastricht Bank's perspective and from UAE perspective. What do you think? Where it is going in next to 3 to 5 years?
See, I think I would pretty much echo what Ashish has said, and I think that's where the industry is moving typically. So Mashreq is one of the largest merchant acquirer in the UAE as well as the region. So we see a lot of this volume, which gives us a little fair bit of insight in terms of how segments are moving. So for example, food delivery has grown in this country more than 300 odd percent. Another interesting segment which where so we need to understand that there was a consumer behavior shift. There was a COVID has been a watershed moment for the consumer behavior
Yeah.
shift. Now people are ready to use digital modes of payments and buying online pretty much as a way of life, right? So another interesting segment is supermarket, for example. You would assume that supermarket is typically a place where you would go to a supermarket and shop. But for us, the supermarket chains who have gone online have had 200 to 50% growth on those channels. And you have supermarket aggregators like InstaShop, Now, etc., which are seeing similar growth over the last year or so. Uh, Again, UAE government is a pioneer in digitization, e-governance, etc., and that's a space that continues to grow. All the services pretty much today in the UAE, in Dubai, are available where you could pay digitally. So I think each segment has adopted e-commerce, given the consumer has demanded it. Supermarket is another one segment. Another segment which traditionally was very heavy on cash is your real estate, and we process a lot of real estate business in the UAE, and a lot of developers have built solutions along with acquirers to accept payments for service fees, etc., which was pretty much cash, which has moved into cards and digital payments. Lastly, I think pure e-commerce, again, something that Ashish has already touched upon. Large e-commerce companies in the UAE consistently see growth, and you see the traditional retail companies as well investing heavily in their e-com platform for the next 3 to 5 years, in line with the shift in the consumer behavior where people are more comfortable to buy online.
Hmm.
Another interesting bit is UAE is highest smartphone penetration in the world, and you see that reflecting in how people pay at the point of sale. So almost 85 to 90% of transactions at point of sale in the UAE are now contactless. Out of those, around 40 to 40% are XPays, where people are using their mobile phone for Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay. So that shift has also happened over the last 1.5 to 2 years.
Thank you. So we are talking about various alternative payment methods being introduced by various players. Banks are taking initiative, central banks are taking initiative, but I believe you both will acknowledge one fact that still we do not have 100% adoption of digital banking or digital payment. So from that perspective, where do you see this, Ashish? Like digital payment, whether the adoption is, according to you, is satisfactory, or do you see another percentage increase in next 1 or 2 years? And what do you see, especially post-pandemic? This could be a very fair question.
Yes, Chitrajit, you're absolutely right. You know, the day we achieve 100% ideal number, I think that number will take some time to be achieved. But I think we're pretty much there. I would say that the number of customers who have been using our digital channels, be it mobile banking, internet banking, NFC-enabled cards on the ATM or the POS machines, or using the e-commerce platform, they have just doubled in the space of last 1 to 2 years. The activation numbers are very high, the registration numbers are very high, transaction to active numbers are very high. However, this can still get improved. And what would really enable it, for example, like Vibor was mentioning about the implementation of tokenization systems in UAE, and how the customers have jumped to the bandwagon of using Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, and these cardless transactions from their smartphones. And that is something that is yet to come to Oman. And once that comes, I think that will further increase the activation rates. Uh, in addition to it, still the logistical and the last mile delivery ecosystem, that is something that needs to be further enhanced in the country. And it's not that it's not happening, it's growing very, very fast. But that will be a key enabler for the digital payments to grow. And the most important thing is for the fintech ecosystem in the country to grow. And central bank is a key enabler here again, with the issuance of payment service provider licenses, as well as the norms, as well as ensuring that the sufficient collaboration happens between the PSPs and the banks. In fact, we have very good fintechs that have started evolving and coming out of Oman itself. And once this ecosystem dwells to its completion, the whole industry would be getting a lot better. One additional thing that I can think of is the open banking ecosystem. We just have the draft regulations of open banking coming out of from central bank, and once this gets formalized, you will see 360-degree growth in the digital ecosystem, not from the banks, but from a lot of these fintech players who will be collaborating with the banks. That's it,
Absolutely.
Chitrajit, from my side.
Absolutely. So, Vibor, Mashreq Bank is a pioneer in digital payment space, and a lot of new initiatives being taken, which is being followed by other banks in the region. So, from adoption perspective, what is your view?
See, I think my view is adoption of digital payments is not the responsibility of one player, as Ashish alluded to it. It's an ecosystem play, right? Uh, Banks and financial service providers, customers, merchants, uh, governments all need to work together to create the ecosystem and the framework to make a digital payments or digital commerce typically work. And I think we are very fortunate in the UAE, where the infrastructure at each of these legs has been set up it has been set up to for the next surge of growth in the space. For example, almost 90-95% of terminals in the UAE are now contactless. Ashish spoke about regulations. There are very forward-looking regulations that the Central Bank of UAE has brought in for all the new age fintechs who can participate, collaborate, co-create with the banks, right? So for example, the stored value regulation for digital wallets, or the recently released retail payment service provider framework, which allows fintech players and to come in, get license, because there's always been that regulatory arbitrage that has been available for fintechs versus banks, and I think these regulations standardize it, and then it helps banks to actually work and co-create products with these players. So I think once all the ecosystem players are aligned, incentives are aligned, I think that's when we will have the next surge or the next wave of adoption of digital banking, digital payments, and digital commerce. And of course, open banking is the key on the fintech ecosystem side for account aggregation, lending, etc. And already papers are out, and once those are formalized, we will see more growth on the non-payment side as well.
Thank you, Vibhor. So, gentlemen, we are seeing a surge of digital payment initiatives taken by various banks, and as we move forward, the fraudsters they're gearing up, they're coming up with new avenues to bother us, bother the banks. So banks are becoming intelligent. They are also coming up with various solutions and technology. So we saw a 2 decades preference of 3DS 1.0 that has been migrated to 2.0 right now, wherein from 15 fields to 150 fields. So banks are more informed today to whether to reject a transaction or to accept it, so that ultimately the customer experience will be better. So from that perspective, access control server, 3DS 2.0, then risk-based authentication, these are the things. And Wibmo is a pioneer in fraud management system across all the channels for the banks. So from that point of view, Vibor, I'm going to you. What is the impact generally you see of risk-based authentication in any transaction, and for a set of transaction for a bank?
See, I think we need to strike a balance whenever we are talking about authentication solutions, right? We need to, especially at which are at the merchant that drive commerce, there always has to be a balance that need to be we need to strike between the lost sale versus lost fraud, right? And the ideal utopia is to get this absolutely right, where you have solutions that are calibrated well enough to ensure that false positives are less, or your threshold of the risk that you want to take on a transaction compensates for the linked revenue that you need to generate. I think 3DS to 1.0 started, and you rightly said it's been almost 1.5 decades to 2 decades since the solution was out. And I think with 2.0, what is happening is the control is coming to both the issuer as well as the merchant to take a call based on what the risk appetite of the issuer or the merchant is, right? Earlier you had very few fields, now you have 150 fields that are available to both the issuer and the acquirer. And hence, for example, I'll give you an example. The issuer may want to step up, but with the amount of data that's available in 2.0, the merchant can still decide to step down and process a transaction, take that liability, which some of the merchants are doing today without enough data being available, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, if it's a 3DS 2.0 merchant, the issuer may say, we want to step down given we have enough information. So I think given the amount of data that's coming in, smart risk-based authentication solutions can sit both at issuers and merchants, and we can have increased transaction success rates with reduced number of frauds. However, my point is that 2.0 is a new tech, right? It's a complicated tech, and I think again here, like in 1.0, in 2.0 again, all ecosystem players need to come together, be it issuers, merchants, regulators, card scheme providers, who are driving the protocol to get the ecosystem to understand the benefits of the solution. And lastly, I think players like Wibmo play a very important part, because it's one thing to get 150 data points, It's another thing to decide what to do with it and take commercial decisions. Because if I step up or step down, being a merchant or a issuer, there are linked commercial, there are linked commercial incentives
Implications.
or the commercials implications that would be for my decision. So I
Yeah.
think with the data available, risk-based authentication will become more mainstream, like what 1.0 was, but it needs a lot of training. I think here importance of self-learning algorithms will become very important, because self-learning AI-driven algorithms to just strike that balance, get the transaction history, and get your model, your risk-based authentication model, to be self-learning, to get the best out of it and to strike that balance. So those are my thoughts on this.
Thank you, thank you. So, Ashish, I'm just changing the topic a bit. So, from Oman's perspective, not a generalistic version, but from Oman's perspective or from Bank Muscat perspective, when you see that surge of digital payment and a lot of fraudulent activities are happening parallelly, what are the measures probably a bank in Oman has taken already, or probably your bank? You can discuss both, whatever is comfortable according to you.
Sure. First, I would like to just say that what Vibhor said is absolutely right. The fine balance is very, very important. And when it comes to the balance, it's the balance of usability versus security, right? And ultimately, it boils down to the profitability of the bank on one side, and on the other side, the whole customer experience. So, yes, we at Bank Muscat, we're also taking, being a bank and the biggest acquirer, issuer, and having more than 50-60% market share, the security is of the paramount importance to the bank. And, all the measures, all the compliance related measures, security being measures are being taken up by the bank. For example, we don't sync with the PIN with the card anymore. The customer is given the option on the digital channels to set or reset or create a PIN. We are promoting big time contactless payments. We have increased the threshold of the contactless payments within the entire ecosystem. That has driven a lot of cashless transactions within the country also. We have also following the risk-based approach with the compliance of the visa mandate of implementing 3Ds 2.0. And we are also using it in the day-to-day. Uh, we have configured these risk-based algorithms that define the user experience in a much nicer way. So typically, if a customer is doing a low-value transaction over a merchant on a regular basis using the same mobile phone and the same OS, uh, and using the same transaction categories with the same amount, why give him a second factor authentication? Just make it slice simple so customer is at a much better space, as well as the bank, as well as the merchant. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. As it is win-win for everyone, and we see a lot of initiatives being taken by the government in UAE. We are having Expo 2020. A lot of tourists are coming, like pre-pandemic season. So, Vibhor, going back to you, do you see any threat coming in, like so many tourists coming, so many transactions happening, cross-border transactions, people before people coming, they're probably spending into hotels or something like that. So, do you see that as these transactions are increasing, do you see any additional threats, or have you encountered anything like this?
See, I think UAE is a very unique market in terms of how the market is, right? So 25% of volume that happens on a merchant using digital modes of payment is
Mhm.
cross-border. So and this is not just and the way a merchant is accepting payments is evolving, right? Earlier you talked about cards that were you had zip zap readers. We moved from there to a mag stripe, from there to chip and pin, to contactless, to digital wallets with authentication using digital modes when a transaction is done. So this is the evolution that has happened on the card space. Over and above that, form factors are changing, where non-card led payment options are becoming very, very relevant, especially for a high cross-border market like UAE. So Mashreq was the first ones to launch Alipay in the market, and we have a host of other wallets from countries like India, for example UPI, and we just signed up to open up UPI wallets on our point of sale, to WeChat Pay, etc. Right? So So it's a country where diverse mode of payments are being accepted at merchants, and I think while all of us are gearing up to improve our security measures, we need to be aware that our friends or the fraudsters on the other side are also working, equally hard and investing money there. So I think from a security perspective, uh, there are a lot of things that banks have done, which some basic stuff like for cardholder security, PCI DSS certification and compliance. So Muscat completed recertified our entire tech for PCI DSS. There are clear infosec guidelines within the bank. There is a standard process to be followed when a new product is launched. I think from another thing that we have done is we have brought in point-to-point encryption on our terminals, where the transaction is point-to-point encrypted, not just on the network but on the tunnel as well, to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks when the transaction is happening. So those things uh, have happened, and I think the central bank of the UAE has also been very forward-looking in this space. And there was a guidance paper that came out last year, especially for issuers and acquirers, which talked about, one example is, innocuous transaction that you do at a merchant, and the merchant takes your card and swipes the card on the till to close the transaction. While the card is swiped to close the transaction, card data is vulnerable to theft, and we have seen multiple instances in multiple countries where a lot of card data has been stolen. So Central Bank of the UAE brought in guidelines, or brought in best practices, where uh, acquirers have to educate merchants not to do double swipe. So we have brought in solutions where integrations are happening uh, between the point of sale or cash register of the merchant and the point of sale terminal. Sometimes it's just education. Uh,
Yeah.
Most of the cashiers don't even know that they can actually swipe a plastic card to close that till. They just do that to close the till. And so training is required, where you tell them to not swipe. Once it's integrated, you really don't need to swipe. So we have done a lot of work on integrating the merchant point of sale with the terminal, to ensure the cardholder card data and information flows in directly to the point of sale, rather than someone needs to enter or to swipe. So I think those things have improved. And I think lastly, on the online side, I think 3DS 2.0 is something. 3DS 2.0 coupled with tokenization, if it is used optimally, I think that will solve a lot of issues on fraud, plus improve success rate and customer experience to a large extent. And I think we are in that exciting time when both the technologies are now available, and it's incumbent upon, it's up to the market players to really use that and build solution that they give consumer experience, as well as protect merchants as well as the consumers from potential frauds.
Thank you, Vibhor. Ashish, I will go to you. See, I have a question. I know that there is a question answer session afterwards, but this is so relevant to what Vibhor pointed out just now. Do you see that there is a play for multi-factor authentication beyond two-factor authentication, wherein biometrics would take its charge, and banks would move into that direction? Would it complicate the matter, or do you think that that is a requirement, considering the fraudsters are coming and they're creating problems all across the globe?
See, definitely, the whole idea, like I said before, and Vibor had also mentioned, is to strike a balance, right? So, if you are able to give better security with a better usability, why not explore those options? But then we have to look at it with the caution also, because all these big techs are evolving at the moment right now. New technologies are coming in, so we have there, and there is no precedence as onto it. We have heard cases where a lot of these biometrics are broken up also, be it whichever form factor of biometrics. So I think it has to be taken up with caution, but definitely it is a way forward for the banks to move forward.
Vibhor, any particular point from your end regarding
I
multi-factor
think
authentication?
I think I just want to make one point here, that any authentication method that you're using, while the security and the user experience is important, I think one critical thing is interoperability, right? You should be able to have that authentication system available for your consumer across the globe. right? Because everyone is a global citizen now. So while we build this solution, standardization of solutions across across the industry is important, like what EMV did or TDS 2.0 is doing. So and there's a lot of work already happening on biometric authentication. Merchants are using it. We have seen Amazon using it. We are discussing with a couple of merchants here to use biometrics at the checkout. So those things are happening, but I think we need to be aware that whatever solution is coming in has to be interoperable as well for it to really scale.
Yes, absolutely. And you have mentioned, or you have made a point very clear that 3DS, access control server, various fraud measures we have taken, but tokenization plays its role. And Wibmo has launched its token vault recently, which we are promoting across the globe. And we have received a tremendous response from banks and banking fraternity. So we will work closely with the banks in order to help them, support them in this regard. Uh, I'm going into the last question probably, and this is regarding, again, going back to Ashish. This is regarding, so we are seeing this sophisticated fraud and various initiatives being taken, etc. But what about the cross-border transactions? What about the tourists coming in and various ways, as Vivor pointed out, various ways people are doing transaction these days, wallet-based transactions, e-commerce transactions. So from bank's point of view, what are the measures you should take?
Absolutely. So, see, we have taken a very 360-degree view to security, into control frauds within our bank. And I think most of the global banks are following the same approach. So, for example, we have a fraud monitoring solution that is implemented in the bank. And it's not just one channel like internet, mobile, ATMs. So, all the channels, e-commerce, debit cards, credit cards, whether it's local transaction, international transactions, they are all interconnected and it's all parameter based. In both online transactions as well as preemptive measures, even before the frauds could take place, we have a capability now to stop those transactions, disable those transactions, blacklist the merchants, whitelist the merchants, increase or decrease the transaction velocities and the amounts that are currently allowed in the fraud monitoring systems. So all these capabilities are built in again to strike that fine balance between security and the usability. And banks should be in a comfortable space because millions and billions of reals are being transacted over these e-commerce as well as digital banking channels. On top of it, we have also implemented physical security. For example, a lot of these tourists who are coming with these cards using our ATMs, so getting the ATMs implemented with the latest security patches, building in the physical security across the ATM rooms, implementing SPS, so the anti-phishing scams to control the cash-in traps on the ATM. Uh, uh, Similarly, whitelisting of our mobile banking applications, covering them with these trappers so that they can't be decrypted as well as broken by the customers and can be injected with these malfunction codes, doing the performance and the penetration testings on a quarterly basis. So there are a whole lot of measures that the banks are taking to ensure that the 360-degree view of security is implemented.
Thank you. So now let's go into the question answer session. We received a number of questions. So we'll take two questions just to manage our timeline. The first question would be in regards to the current pandemic situation which we all are facing. And during this period, we have seen that digital payment has grown. A lot of fintech companies are coming up with newer version. So and both the banks, Maastricht Bank or Bank Muscat, yeah, you are the pioneers in digital payment space. So do you see any kind of competition or threat that so many fintech players are coming? Are you going towards collaboration, or what is the measure, or so what are the steps you have taken regarding this to counter or collaborate? Going to Vibor.
So I think from our Mashreq perspective, I think we need to co-create and collaborate with fintechs. There are certain things that fintechs do well. There are certain things that banks do well, and while there may be competing products, but rather than competing, we can co-create products that add value to both our customers as well as the customers of the fintechs. And I think the amount of work that we have done over the last 2 to 3 years in digitizing our bank, so we have digitized the bank not just from outside but inside as well. A lot of microservices, hollowed cores, getting ready for ecosystem play with the next round, next stage fintechs that can allow us to co-create products, as well as these APIs can then be integrated with ecosystem players, where these providers could then become a source of new account opening and new customer acquisition for the banks. So I think it banks and fintechs need to work together to build and co-create products. I think what if I may, and this is my personal view, if I may, that the threat is not really fintech. I think what everyone needs to be aware of is big tech. The large big tech, like Google, Facebook, etc., are coming into commerce, and both fintechs and banks need to understand that customers, those companies are going to come into financial services, and hence we need to compete with them. And you already have instances, for example, India, where WhatsApp payments is big, Google payments is big, and they're doing it in multiple geographies. So those are my thoughts. And I think the whole investment that banks are doing in digitization, one big leg is the ability to get out products quickly as tech companies, right? So we no longer have release cycles every month. We have release cycles every week, if not every day, right? With the new investments that we have done. So the idea is, I think, rather than compete, while you may compete at some places, but you will also need to collaborate and co-create products.
Thank you. Going to Ashish, how similar or dissimilar your thoughts are?
No, absolutely. I would 100% agree with what Vibhor is saying. See, gone are the times when there used to be competition between banks and the fintechs. I'm sure there's competition in certain areas, but then there's a huge amount of collaboration that is required at the moment. And I'm sure all the banks in the ecosystem, all the forward-looking banks in the ecosystem are doing it, and so are we. We strongly believe in bank as a platform strategy, and we believe that we don't have to create everything. If something is created in the market, and we can use that and be agile and nimble and giving a good user experience to our customers, and focus best on what are our best capabilities, our strong points as a bank, ensuring customer trust, ensuring that the money is kept safe, ensuring that the security and the frauds are taken care of. And we can use the advantages of the fintech in the ecosystem and build on top of it to give a superior customer experience. That's what we are currently working on. And in fact, we are not just working only with the fintechs, also working with the regulator very, very closely to ensure that there's a thriving ecosystem of fintechs, banks, and the regulation that is there in the market.
Thank you. So the last question to Vibhor, before we wind up the session. So 3DS has gone up, new measures have been taken, but from merchant acquiring perspective, e-commerce perspective, do you see really that transaction has grown where the safety features are being implemented? The transactions have grown from, if I compare 1.0 and 2.0, two different scenarios. So what is your thought regarding this?
See, I think transactions have grown, and that's a factor of not just security measures that we have taken in terms of authentication solutions, but the macro factors, the global factors, as well as the user experience shift has led to e-commerce transactions growing. Uh, uh, I think there's always a discussion that you have with merchants, right? 3DS breaks the experience. We don't want to do 3DS, and there are drop offs. 7 to 8% transactions are lost. But the other side of the story is that because there is 3DS 1.0, and I'll come to 2.0, because there is 3DS 1.0 and the adoption is pretty much universal, people are also becoming more comfortable comfortable to do transactions online because they see frauds declining. They see each and every transaction authenticated while they are present. So I don't believe that 3ds or authentication solutions have in any way hampered e-commerce. While user experience is a bit, but they have given consumers enough comfort to do transactions, right? So that's one. Before 2.0 came in, we have worked with merchants, and there are merchants globally who have built their own sophisticated authentication solutions.
Yeah.
For example, large merchants who are PCI DSS certified, who know the customers, would do stuff like authentication for the first time, and then you do risk based authentication in the easiest, in the most simplistic way, saying that the consumer is already authenticated beyond a particular transaction limit the transactions would go through, for example, right? uh, I think 2.0 is new to the country. You know Today, while issuers, pretty much every issuer is moved to 2.0 in the UAE. For Mashrek, most of our merchants have also moved. However, the sophisticated risk-based authentication on top of 2.0 across the merchant and the issuer has not scaled up for us to have enough data saying that whether transaction volume is increasing, success rates are increasing. But logically, intuitively, once this solution becomes mature, when once people are able to use the data and take decisions, my view is obviously success rates would improve, user experience would become better, and that would lead obviously for the transactions to continue rising.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Vibhor. I believe some glitch with Ashish, so he will come back soon in this forum. But it's fascinating to understand your views, the views coming from Master Eggman's perspective. We have covered the regulatory guideline, and at the same time, I believe we all have this responsibility towards the community and the payments fraternity to support our clients and create an unified platform in terms of payment security and various ways of authentications being used. Yes, Ashish, you are back. So just the last question before we wind up. I believe we have a couple of minutes time before we get into that. So you have worked in two different geographies and worked in various banks. So when we talk about digital payments, and you have seen, witnessed this digital payment growing from a particular percentage, which is probably 10 to 12% every year, we have seen growing. It is growing. So from that perspective, what do you see if you talk about Asia and Middle East? Uh, is there any comparison, or do you see that one is following other, or they're completely coming up with newer initiatives unilaterally?
That's a very interesting question, I must say. Uh, See, if you think of it, one would feel that Asia, Middle East are quite different in terms of their demographics, but there are a lot of similarities. If you look at both of these countries, I would say continents, they've got very high young population. If you look at India, more than 50% of the population of India is less than the age of 35 years. And if you look at Oman per se, similar, more than 70% of the population is less than the age of 35 years. There's a huge mobile penetration in each of these countries, which is connected to internet. Uh, like in India, more than 70% of the population is connected onto mobile phone and internet. In Oman, it's around 150%. So one person has more than one mobile phones, which is connected to internet. The cost of internet in each of these countries is substantially decreasing. The education levels are increasing. The fintechs and the technology aspects of the merchants and the customer demands is increasing in both the countries. I think these are the seeding points that essentially increase the adoption of digital banking, digital payments in both India, Oman, Middle East, a lot of these countries. So it's a lot similar to each other. I would say that.
Gentlemen, just one minute. Very interesting question for all of us. I believe this is whenever we have huddle, we talk about this. Just one minute each. Do you really think that card-based transaction will survive in next 5 to 10 years with Vivor?
So, card-based transactions, I would consider the rail to be card here. So, will card-based transactions survive? Yes, they would. Will the form factor remain the card only? uh, that's something that's already changing, right? So your card is no longer a card in your wallet. Card is actually in your mobile phone, and the form factor has already changed while the rails remain the same. So I think the form factor of how a card based transaction is used would definitely shift from your plastic to other modes like contactless, plus with e-commerce growing at the pace at it as at what it is, and tokenization solutions available, you will people will start storing their cards in wallets, in vaults at merchants, as well as standardized global checkout mechanisms. So that's my view, because card is not just payment, it's credit card. So there's a lot of credit that comes with that instrument. So we just look at the mode of payment, but at the back, financial institutions and banks have given that credit for people to do transactions. So the form factor would change, but that rail would continue. Obviously, alternate payment methods are scaling up globally, and that's what we see in India as well as other countries as well. So will alternate payment methods eat into some part of the card business? I think that would happen, but there's enough cash available in the market for both these form factors and players to survive on, right? And what's happening is alternate payment methods, QR code payments. You have more new age digital lending solutions are available, like buy now pay later, which has taken the world by storm, which is almost like a point of sale instant digital lending, where transactions more or less are done through QR codes, which again is something that's picking up. However, we need to see how fast or how much of the market they capture. But obviously, transactions rising. You talk about Europe and Americas. If you look at, for example, buy now pay later statistics in America, while the base is small, almost 120 amongst Gen Z. BNPL has seen almost 150% growth, and for millennials, it's 100% plus. Uh, and I see another question here: would BNPL replace credit cards? Again, BNPL is a way of writing credit. I think it's too early to say BNPL would replace credit cards, because uh, business models, risk models are yet to be firmly established. So I think only time will tell, but I think it's too early to say that BNPL will replace credit cards, in my view. If you see the transactions being processed on BNPL are fraction of the overall transactions today. But of course, it's something which is very interesting, because it's an alternate mode of lending. Another interesting thing I would say in BNPL is there is a regulatory arbitrage available today for BNPL players, right? You can underwrite credit without in different geographies. There are different ways to do it, but traditional lenders and banks versus BNPL providers, there is a regulatory arbitrage available, where stuff like, you don't necessarily need to do a credit bureau check or income verification, which allows a BNPL provider technically to write these loans faster. But I'm sure there will be regulators are looking at it, and there will be regulation in that space as well. And when that happens, the industry would also have to evolve. So the need of credit remains, whether you do it through a credit card, whether you do it through an instant loan on POS, or whether you do it through a buy now, pay later at a merchant checkout. The need for credit will continue to remain, is my view. But will BNPL replace credit cards? I think that's a very bold statement to make. I think we are too early, to make that statement, or even get close to that.
To some extent, I agree with you. Going back to Ashish for just a couple of minutes, your 2 cents on BNPL, because we see a lot of developments happening in KSA, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Oman from BNPL perspective. So, what is your view where the industry is going through BNPL?
See, there is a need of credit in all these countries. Uh, we all agree to that, right? Uh, we all also know that credit is highly regulated in the banking industry. And if I talk about Oman, um, I I mean you have to see it to believe it that you need to have a bank account with the bank. You need to have your salary coming in with the bank. You need to have X amount of money coming into the bank every month. You need to link your end of service benefits. So if a guy gets credit from the bank, it is a very clean credit that he gets. Now it's not just like Vivod was just mentioning. BNPL is not just about technology. It is the credit underwriting system that is more revolutionized with this offering. So if with certain ways we can use AI to give credit to the customer, and that risk of giving credit to the customer can be absorbed from the bank side, it can be taken by the fintech, and still a sustainable business model would be created. Then BNPL will definitely grow. But these cycles in itself would take 3 to 5 years to be gauged whether it's a sustainable cycle or not. It's too early for anybody. So that's why we do see a lot of funding coming into the BNPL space, and these are self-funded models that are growing. But I think we'll get to see reality in next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe, although the discussion was pointed towards surge of digital payment and associated fraud, but we have touched upon certain points like BNPL, various alternative payment methods in both the countries, especially in the region. We probably articulated a small comparison how Asia is moving, how Middle East is moving. So it's a fantastic discussion we had, and it's a 360 reviews from both of you. So thank you so much for your time. We sincere gratitude from Wibmo for participating into this event. In the future also, we will invite you for similar sessions when we will seek your views, your guidance from the region's perspective. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you
Lovely
very much,
talking to you.
Chitrajit.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Take
Have a
care.
good
Thank you.
weekend.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.